Good afternoon, everybody. Could I have your attention, please? Thank you. My name is George Mulderbarrow. I'm the New South Wales Chair of ATSI, and it's my very pleasant duty to welcome you all this afternoon. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands on which we meet, and I do note that we have a large contingent of online attendees today that are all spread around the state. So I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of the traditional owners, past and present. So I have a very simple duty today, and that's just to introduce our guest speaker, the chair of the panel, Sally Ann Williams. Sally Ann is the CEO of a Sydney tech incubator, Cicada Innovations, which I understand applies cutting-edge science to a whole range of solutions, problems that our society has, and I'm sure we'll explore that this afternoon. So, welcome, Sally.
Thank
Sally
you.
Ann.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and can I just to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we are gathered here today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I'd also just like to acknowledge, our first scientists and engineers, and acknowledge the incredible contributions over millennia that our First Nations people have made in caring for country, in innovating, and being the longest living culture. I think it's incredible that we have relationship and are able to come together and learn from each other and respect and care for country and community. For those of you that are joining us online, I'm really sorry that you can't see me. I'm standing at the side of the lectern, but I will very, very shortly introduce our panel, and they're going to be far more exciting than me, so you don't need to see my face anyway, but I will pop over just so you can see me. So we're nothing if not flexible in this place with technology. So look, before I ask our panel to get up and get into this in a conversation, just a couple of thoughts and remarks, I guess, from me. So I am the CEO of Cicada Innovations. I've actually been there 5 years now, which is extraordinary to think it's gone that fast. For those of you who don't know, Cicada is Australia's oldest and largest deep tech incubator. We are just over right next to Redfern Station at the now known precinct that is Everleigh. But really it's Redfern, just don't refer anybody. I like it being Redfern. And I'm sorry guys online, you won't be able to do that. We don't have a tech team, so there can't be somebody using the camera to zoom in on me. So I'm really sorry, I can't do everything at the moment. I'm a one-woman show for the second. So we've been around for 25 years. We'll be 25 years old next month in August, and we exist to help build the deep tech economy of Australia. So we build science and engineering businesses. So at the moment, I've got about 50 resident companies employing about 450 people doing everything in the life science, from medical devices, diagnostics, therapeutics, software as a medical device. We're the home of the National Space Industry Hub, so we have upstream and downstream space companies. We have ag tech companies, quantum companies, new materials companies, battery companies, hydrogen companies, robotics companies. I've got some people working in infrastructure as well. I'm going to be forgetting somebody, and if they were online, they're going to be screaming at me. We also run Juma Biomedical Incubator down in Melbourne, which is the brand new biomedical incubator in CSL's global headquarters. It's a collaboration with CSL, WeHi, the University of Melbourne, with some initial seed funding from Breakthrough Victoria. And we recently opened the Westmead Health Tech Hub, which we have a whole bunch of health companies out there as well. And we run way too many commercialization training programs in all of those areas and beyond, and generalized deep tech for me to tell you about. So if you want to head on over to cicadainnovations.com, you can check it all out and come along to Tech 23 and meet some of the most amazing companies in Australia solving some of our most pressing problems. Now, before I joined Cicada, though, I did spend 13 years at Google on the engineering team, and I worked in what we would now call the AI division, but it was really research and machine intelligence. And for those of you in computing, you'll feel very comfortable with those names and go, yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I helped build that engineering team here in Australia from 11 people when I joined to about 800 when I left. I think there are about 1,200 now in Sydney. And we worked in research across a whole range of things. So not just building products and services, but in health, in automation, in robotics, in all sorts of really good, fun things. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I'm excited to go a little bit beyond the sort of traditional conversation of AI and it's just going to steal our jobs, or we're all going to, end up with deep fakes. There's some real challenges that we face in AI, but it's an incredible opportunity for us here in Australia. And I think it's something that we need to get a more nuanced conversation on, and we need to dig into a bit of the richness of the possibilities and be aware of some of the challenges and some of the limitations that we might be facing collectively across the nation and how we can resolve them. So I am known for being positive and optimistic about the opportunity in front of us. Whenever you see a coin, there's two sides to a coin. So whenever we're pessimistic about something and we see the problem, I'm like, what's the other side of that coin? Because the opposite of that problem is the opportunity we need to engage in. So what is the lever that we need to do to flip it from problem to opportunity? And so I'm very excited to welcome our panel up here to come and join me. So I'm just going to call out their names and I'm going to get them, I'm actually going to put them on notice because they've got some really amazing things that they've been doing, but I'm going to ask them a tricky question, which I haven't actually told them to prepare for first, what they come up. But can I get Dr. Cicely Paris to come on, Dr. Ian Opperman and Dr. Juliet Andrews, all of the doctors, would you like to come and join me up here so you can actually provide fantastic views for the people online to look at, and they can hear my voice, but they can look at your wonderful faces. Now I've got some bios here about what you do, but I'm gonna only read out a sentence from each of them, and then I'm actually going to ask you, and you will have to use the microphone and share. I'm going to ask you to kind of maybe unpack that a little bit more for people. In reality, what does that mean? Because there's a lot of really big fancy words on here, which are all really delightful, but I kind of want to know what your day-to-day life looks like. So Juliet, you are a partner at Ernst & Young. You've done 20 years in workforce change, changing nature of work, how organisations plan and prepare for the impact of AI, digital transformation, globalisation, hybrid work, shifting employee expectations. I mean, it sounds like you've had the brunt of the last couple of years, probably with COVID, bringing all of those into collision.
Yeah. What does that actually mean?
What do you do?
Yeah, what does that actually mean? Yeah, it sounds really fancy. I mean, really, my background is in psychology, so one of the softer sciences. But one of the things that I really enjoy in the work that I do is just helping people who are working in any form, leaders and teams and all manner of different types of organisations, work out what they could do differently or better to get things done. So that often looks at how we can use technology in work. It looks at how skills evolve very quickly and how fast we need to learn new things in work. It looks at how you grow that organisation you just described, Sally, from 12 people to 800. How do you design the work? How do you design the structures that support that work, the systems, the tech, and the behaviours that sit underneath that?
Now that sounds so interesting, and I'm going to be really excited to get some of the insights from you in a moment. Cicely, you are the director of CSIRO-wide research program on collaborative intelligence, which is developing the science and technology for humans and AI to work better together. There's a lot in this bio that goes on. What do you do all day?
That's a good question. Some people here will know. So yes, my background is in artificial intelligence, in particular natural language processing, which I think all of you know now because of ChatGPT and the rest. So how to deal with language. And these days I'm directing the largest research program, which is actually across CSIRO, where we're looking at how AI can support scientists and experts. And in particular, we're looking at not at automating, but how through a sustained interaction with AI, how can we human and AI collaborate so that they can do together what neither of them can do alone. So how can really AI support the human and we leverage them, the intelligence of both human and AI, because they have different type of intelligence, but they can work together better. So we're addressing a number of issues within that space and working with scientists across CSIRO in all kind of different domains on that.
Awesome.
Hope that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's so much richer to hear from people what they actually spend their time on than reading out their bios, I think, because it actually brings it to life. and I'm a big believer in bringing some colour into the conversation. So, Ian, a CEO and Chief Data Scientist, New South Wales Data Analytics Centre. But I actually heard you before, and I know you're doing a bunch of other things. So I feel like we've got a bit of an update to the conversation here.
There is an update, thank you very much. So I was the first ever Chief Data Scientist of the New South Wales Government. That role has now been abolished, so I was the longest serving Chief Data Scientist. and one of the best, as far as the jury is still out. So I now run a startup. After being in government, I worked at CSO, I worked at Nokia Networks, I worked in industry, academia, science organisations, government. The next natural step, of course, is a startup. So now in a startup with Victor Dominello, who was the Minister for Customer Service, David Rees, who was the CEO of Service New South Wales, Matt Dawson, who was the Chief of Staff for Victor. And we're doing essentially Service New South Wales in a box for anybody who wants it. If you'd like Service New South Wales, come talk to me afterwards.
Fabulous, thank you, and thank you for that update. So let's get into the conversation. So ground rules, everybody. I've got a couple of things that I want to tease out for the panel and pull it out, but please, prepare your questions, because I'm going to make sure that we've got enough time to throw to the audience and throw to online when we do get to that point. But there's some real richness. I had a privilege of hanging out with this panel online last week to have a briefing call, and I was just kind of like, I should just hit record and send this along, because this was such a fascinating conversation. And all I'm going to try and do is be a little bit of a traffic signal and direct the conversation. But if they just go for it, I'm going to sit back and enjoy with all of you too. So the first thing I want to do, I want to get a little bit beyond the hype. AI is, in my opinion, a little bit ridiculously hyped at the moment. And ironically, because it's not something new to us, and actually we've been engaging with AI for a very, very long time, we just may not be aware of it. But you're all experienced in this space and in this sector, and you've got a broad range of seeing from the deepest of the depth of people that are comfortable to, Juliet, large organisations that are like, oh my God, what do we do? We know we're being told we should do something. I'd really love to get into some concrete examples of how AI is already being used effectively in Australia in particular, and maybe some international ones if we can't think of anything in Australia. Love to hear from you what excites you the most. What are you seeing, and what do we need to be thinking about? I think this is a really good broad place to paint a picture for all of us beyond just ChatGPT. Not that because there is actually AI use beyond ChatGPT, and there's also things beyond ChatGPT. But maybe we'll start with you, Juliet.
Yeah, sure. So we obviously work with some very large employers, and we are a very large employer. We've got 400,000 people globally in EY. So EY has built its own large language model so that we can actually use AI day to day in the work that we're doing. And lots of the employers that we're working with are also using Microsoft Copilot and other forms of AI in sort of day to day. So it's really exciting in terms of what's possible for them to accelerate the work they're doing and also to share knowledge across large, complex organisations. So there's a huge opportunity. The thing that they're struggling with is moving from sort of pilots to scaling. Like that's where they're really hitting some, roadblocks. There's a lot of test and learn. There's a lot of pilots happening using sort of AI in different pockets of organisations to test different things. But then expanding that out across, say, 30,000 people. I was talking to one of the banks earlier this week, and they were just saying, like, getting it from the 300 to the 30,000 is the biggest challenge they've got. Part of that's around teaching people how to use it. It seems really easy, and for many of you who obviously have spent your careers working with AI and other kinds of machine learning, that's day to day for many of us. This is really new technology, and we're treating it like Google, and we probably don't know how to use it properly. So there's a whole lot of sort of learning that has to go into actually making it effective. And then there's sort of other bits, and I'm sure we'll get to those around sort of where does the data go and, confidentiality, privacy and trust and all of those good things. But generally, there's a huge amount of optimism out there around how AI can change and improve work and get people to do things and help them sort of stop doing boring things and maybe do more interesting things. Lots of optimism, but probably some questions around skills piece, and then how people coming into the workforce are going to learn to do work, you know, sort of differently.
I want to just, before I throw to the others, is there a particular use case that you have come across now inside of EY, your team, or a broader thing where you've kind of gone, oh, that is brilliant?
Oh, there are so many. So people across the team have been experimenting using all of the available AI that we've got at our fingertips. And again, it's so different for us, for anyone working today, because this tech is available to us. We're not waiting for it to be released. Normally we have to wait for, you know, the large tech company to give us the permission and the accessibility. And now we can just pick up our phones or, you know, and get onto it. So it's very organic. And people in our team, for example, will pick it up with a client problem. They'll use EYQ, which is our internal one. They might use Copilot or something similar to start to generate some solutions very, very quickly. They'll show me, oh, look, I just put this in. What normally would have taken me 8 or 9 hours, it probably took me 20 or 25 minutes. It's a massive leap in terms of what they can get done. We create a lot of learning content for clients. And as another example, I've got teams of people who create online digital learning content. What might have taken them a couple of weeks, they can literally do in a couple of days. So there's an incredible productivity gain to be had here. And then the question is, what do you do with the other 10 days? You know, so that's sort of that's the bigger question, right?
Cicely, would you like to kind of tell us your what is exciting you the most, what you're seeing? And
So like, Julie, I think there are lots and lots of opportunities to indeed increase productivity. And there's been lots of studies showing that indeed it has increased productivity in many different areas and in many different types of jobs. Another exciting thing for me is in some cases, it has also allowed a more diverse workforce, in that to do a particular job, it used to be you needed that particular expertise. While now so for example, even in machine learning, we needed somebody who knew machine learning. Now you can actually open up some of that with those models because they can help somebody who may have other expertise, like creativity or something else. So we could even end up with a much more diverse workforce, which I think is really exciting. Now, beside the example that we just heard about, I know I've just heard one example just this morning, actually, from somebody in this room of somebody being a patent attorney, who now they use it to get their first draft of a patent. Now, that's amazing. And then, of course, they work with it. But that's an amazing example of how quickly it is. I also have a lot of colleagues at CSR, also scientists. I have a colleague who told me a few days ago, she does work in environmental modeling. She can now do in a few hours what used to take her a few days because she uses the coding aspect of it. And again, to me, that's absolutely amazing. But I think we do have to be careful as well. So it doesn't solve everything. So there has been studies showing that, in fact, in some cases, it actually decreases productivity because it's not what it's aimed for. So I think it's really important for us to understand where is the right place for the AI and what type of AI is actually required. So should we just automate? Should we work with it? And how should we work with it? And we do have to ask those questions. And I also agree that, and that's one thing we are looking at very much in our work, to understand the appropriate place. And then I certainly agree the skills aspect is really, really important. So not just to get people AI literate, whatever that might be, and it's quite complex, but also to make sure people have the appropriate critical thinking to potentially question the AI, just question people sometimes, and it's not always correct either, and we do have to understand that. And we have to be able to engage appropriately. We have to develop the appropriate metacognitive skills to know how to engage in the best way with AI to get the best results. And that does bring up a big issue of how do we teach that and how do we do that. But I think we do have to be aware that we need the appropriate skills to engage effectively with it. I'll stop here.
what's getting you excited?
Actually, sorry, one more thing I will say here. I think we also do have to, when we design the AI, understanding its place, we have to work on some of the trust aspect. What do we need to do to make sure people really trust it? And we actually have to work on that as well. Sorry.
No worries. I've known Cecile for a very long time, so it's perfectly okay. So if I could just put my yes to me hat on and talk a little bit about what I was doing at New South Wales Government. As I mentioned, first ever chief data scientist, I developed or led the development of the New South Wales AI Assurance Framework. The Commonwealth has now released the Australian Assurance Framework, which is largely built on the principles of the New South Wales Assurance Framework, which is great. We have a framework to help people think about appropriate use of AI and also when to seek help. And with New South Wales, I ran also what was called the AI Review Committee. So I watched a whole lot of different parts of government really innovate with AI. And things they were bringing to this committee were those that were either sensitive or those that were really complex. And that included things like the mobile phone detection for drivers. And we've all heard about it. Some of us may have actually paid the fine, where images taken of you driving your car and the algorithm just goes through and says, driver passenger, driver holding something, driver holding a chocolate bar or a mobile phone, looks like driver holding a mobile phone. Send that off to a human being to decide whether or not to issue a fine. That's then evolved to, you might have heard recently about the seatbelt detection. It's exactly the same process. The algorithm runs through and says, passenger driver, passenger not wearing a seatbelt. It goes to a human being who reviews the image and says, this is something that needs to be actioned. All of those were interesting ways of doing old things in new ways. It was once upon a time that a policeman would use their special powers of looking through their eyes into a car to see whether or not you were wearing a seatbelt and they'd do something about it or not. That old thing is being done in a new way. Another really exciting one was the sepsis prediction, which is still going through trials in New South Wales. So someone in an emergency department, constant monitoring, and the machine goes ping, it alerts if there's a, I was about to say if the machine believes, but if the machine predicts that there's someone about to have a sepsis episode, which compared to a nurse doing rounds of the emergency department, going back to their desk, punching some numbers in, alert pops up saying that patient you saw 10 minutes ago was about to have a sepsis episode. It's a much better way, provided you get the false positives and false negatives right, a really much better way of doing an old thing in a new way. What I really like is some of the new things in new ways. There's some really powerful work which actually originated in CSR around rules as code. So taking legislation on paper or the digital equivalent and capturing it as rules and then running AI over it. And I saw recently the red meat export regulations mapped into a cloud of legislation and an algorithm going through it to say, this is where the pieces join up, this is where they don't join up, and if you're exporting to the US, this is what you need to do to translate between one and the other. That's really exciting. I also am working with a little company who's looking at predictability of certain types of legal cases. My wife's a barrister, we discuss technology and law a lot. It's not healthy for your relationship.
I'm coming to that dinner party, by the way. That's great.
We get to data pretty quickly. And so taking something which has something as conservative, conventional, and hundreds of years of practicing doing it one way and doing it completely differently, that's exciting. So that's the sort of stuff that excites me now that I'm working with some little startups and working outside of government.
I love that. And I'm just going to add a couple of anecdotes about the hype, I think, at the moment and the reality, because I think it'll set the scene of getting into talking about some of the skills and how we get there and take advantage and caution and all the good things you've already alluded to. I had an investor come to me the other day, and I'm not going to name which investor that was or which VC firm, and they were like, we just closed another round and I'm really looking bullish on AI. And I was like, great. And they said, so what AI startups have you got? And I said, the better question is to ask what startups we have and what scale-ups we have in business that aren't using AI. Because if I look at SpeedX, which does, diagnostic testing and antimicrobial resistance, they have AI in some of the predictions and in some of the modeling that they do, and some of the reporting that they do, and they're using it in that way. If I think about Contactile, which is bringing tactile sensing to robots, not only do they have the hardware sensors on the end on their gripper, but it's actually the AI on device at edge that is actually determining whether something is heavy or soft and adjusting in real time to egg versus brick without any change. That's AI. And so I go through and I walk through and I'm going, so this one's AI, this one's AI. And they're like, it's not obvious on your website what's an AI company. I said, AI is a tool to get the job done. It is something we can harness and use. It is not the headline here. The headline is the problem that we're solving. and AI is a part of that solution. So I think it's a really interesting reframing in the context of how we approach things in Australia is what problems do we want to solve, and is AI a part of how we're going to solve those problems. But I want to dive into the people bit, because each one of you have touched on people, systems, process, skills, trust, regulation. You've actually covered a lot of that already and you don't realise, you know, not in depth. And it was a fascinating conversation that we had the other day. And this is where I am going to throw to you in a much less orderly fashion. I want to get into the skills piece and talk about what do we need, like what skills do we need at what levels for people to actually really harness this opportunity, and what might we not be doing if we're, you know, if we are using AI, what skills might we be losing if we're all embracing that. So whoever wants to go first, and yeah,
you're waving at me.
I'm looking
You're
at you
waving, you're
nodding,
waving
Juliet,
at me.
and I know
Okay,
you had so
I
much
do-
to,
I do
it was
deserve-
very insightful the other day, what some of the things you were
Thank you, Sally.
sharing.
It is an area of really a lot of interest, I think, for me and our teams and people who work with work, because AI is changing work so quickly. So there's probably sort of two main themes that we need to explore. One is the design of work. It probably doesn't surprise you to learn that work is not well designed. It's very organic. Job descriptions and actual jobs, as illustrated by your bio and our actual intro, are usually very different things. We will look at job descriptions in, you know, large companies, and they could be 10 or 15 years old, and they haven't been, you know, sort of updated because the work is just moving so quickly. And the way you just described AI augmenting work is the thing that we need to capture. But if we're going to release productivity and actually enable people to do work differently, or to know what to do differently, we actually have to design the work properly. And we don't do that well. So sort of the design of work is one kind of critical thing. And there are some interesting, I'd say, experiments or ways of looking at how we could do that differently. The old days are kind of the hierarchy and the job description, and you move from this level to this level to this level is becoming much more of a sort of a matrix of skills that you acquire over the course of a career. And many of you with children and family members working at different parts of their career, you'll be seeing how rapidly they are moving through different sectors or career opportunities, and technology's kind of going to speed that up and make it sort of more complex. So for us to know what skills we need to design the work. That's sort of the first bit. But the second piece is that around the skills, particularly for those entering the workforce. So we employ a lot of graduates in our firm, and I know lots of big sort of professional services, you know, law firms, places where you come in as a grad, you do the rotations, you learn your craft on the job. A lot of that work you do, or used to do, was research. You know, you would get given a whole bunch of documents on a client problem, go away, read these, summarise, come back to me and tell me what you think is going on. And then we'll discuss how we're going to solve this client problem. And now the AI can do that in a matter of moments. It can suck all that data out and it can spit out a really good, by the way, not inaccurate summary of these are the things that we're seeing through all of this documentation. These are the things that this company is kind of struggling with, or financial issues, or whatever they might be. So the question becomes, how do the new workers learn the craft? And that's kind of what we're starting to really pay some attention to, because if I turn up to your client organisation and I say to you, I think I can help you solve this problem around work design, you may or may not, I hope you would believe that I could, because I've been doing this for a long time and I've got lots of experience I can draw on, and I learned all the foundations when I left uni. Now, if a 27-year-old turns up to you and says, I've been doing this for 3 years with AI, I can help you redesign your company, you go, really? You know, so there's something about how do we create those foundation skills for people coming into the workforce when a lot of what they could do could be augmented very quickly with AI, and how are we going to teach them the foundation skills? And one quick thing before I pass this on is communication. So you mentioned metacognitive skills, but we're seeing lots of grads coming into the company now with much poorer communication skills, verbal and written, and an unwillingness in many ways to debate content, ideas, and, you know, critical sort of discussion, because there's a feeling of, or an interpretation that they They just should keep going with whatever the most important person in the room has just said is the right thing. And so we seem to be losing a bit of the, let's have a debate and a discussion about this, you know, let's like toss it around so we really know what's what. So probably a bit thinking too about that communication or debate of ideas, and will AI just solve the problem so quickly you don't have to debate it?
So interesting. I can't wait. I need to go sit on a few code reviews, because that's one of the things where we used to sit there and the debate, if I can loosely call it that, because it was far more robust, was, you know, rigorous and long and loud.
Yeah.
Is what I would say. But if you can actually get most of that done yourself now, that's a really interesting point. So either or in order here to add to this conversation, because we dug deep into skills and trust the other day, I think, which was really fascinating, the types of things we need to be thinking about.
Yes, I certainly agree with what Juliet said. Now, we're looking in our work very much to support scientists and experts. So I wouldn't, in what we're doing, I wouldn't call it a job design, or it's very similar. We're looking at what problems people are trying to solve in their science. And it's often extremely complex problems. And we're trying to work with them, we're calling it workflow, but trying to understand in what they are trying to do, where in fact, where is the AI and how can the AI support them? What are the pain points? Where can it, you know, looking at lots of data, lots of journal articles, whatever. We're trying to understand what is the workflow and where is the appropriate place for the AI and the type of AI that needs to be there. So we're calling it workflow design, but it's very, very similar, and we need to understand that. And it's not always the same, as it turns out. We've done some work recently with some scientists who are doing genome annotations. And there are lots of people at Cyber doing genome annotation for lots of different purposes. And they need to do it slightly different ways. So it's not even one solution will fit all. We really have to understand what is it they do, what they need to do, rather, and how do they solve problems. The skills, again, just going back to that, it's really important, and I don't have all the answers, obviously, yet. We're looking at that to even be able to identify the right AI tool to use, because there are so many of them now. And, you know, some of them are interchangeable, but not all of them. And then the communication. So then you have to learn how to not just interact with it, but question it and make sure you get the right answer and add to it. And then indeed, you want people to have the appropriate communication skills, because people sometimes do lose that. And we do see a lot of that now as well. People get their CV written with ChatGPT, and, you know, then you try to get them to write something, and it's actually really, really difficult. Or you interview them and they cannot actually say a coherent paragraph, which is very difficult when you're interviewing. So we do have to work on that very seriously, I think, because you don't want to lose the skills, and you will need them to actually participate in the conversation with some of those tools. And that's a very, very serious question, the skills that are needed to be effective in the AI.
I'm going to try a little experiment. So to me, AI is a use of data. And the best analogy I've seen to data is electricity. And the best analogy I've seen to AI is all the things that we can do with electricity. I'm going to ask you to just hang on to that thought for a moment. My first undergraduate degree was in electrical engineering. And with electrical engineering, we would go all the way down to actually assembling flip-flops and gates and doing logic and programming using switches and things like that. I took a year out to do a science degree, computer science and mathematics. In computer science, we just assumed all that stuff existed. We just assumed you had enough memory. We just assumed all this stuff was there, and you wrote a program in one of the many, many different languages that was available. C was the language of choice, but you could do all sorts of exotic things like Lisp and Pascal and so on else. In mathematics, we went from engineering where we just assumed stuff worked, and in maths, they actually got us to demonstrate that a space, a rectangle, a circle was measurable. How on earth do I prove that something is measurable? How do I prove that I can measure this thing? And so I got the experience of being able to go from an abstract world of computer science down to a world where I really needed to care about how much memory I had, what my processing speed was, and the distance between gates, so I didn't have a race condition, to mathematics, where I actually had to prove that I could do it in the first place. And then computer science, the science degree was all sort of fun. We went back to electrical engineering. They said, forget everything you just learned. Let's go back to everything works, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. these Fourier transforms, they just works, that sequences converge, and we'll go back to thinking about the world from a different perspective. And so for me, what I realized was that there's a level where if we've got a functional understanding of how it works, then we can make good things happen from it, which is like writing programming language. If you really need to be an expert, you can either train for it or you can find someone. If I go back to my analogy of electricity, we all know how to use electricity. We all can plug in a lamp, we can all make toast, and we all have that minimum viable understanding of you don't put your fork in the toaster. If you've never done that, you realize it's a bad idea. We also know that we don't put your tongue in a light socket. That's a really bad idea. But we can all make toast and we can all change a light. But if we're going to rewire the house, call an electrician. If you're going to build an electricity, a power station, that that's more than an electrician's job. So we've got a sense of how far we can go with the tools we've got and where to go to get that expertise. The challenge we have is in the world of data and AI, we don't yet have those levels of expertise sorted out. We don't yet have the equivalent of standards, electrical standards. We don't quite have those standards for data and AI yet. They're coming. And we don't yet have that framework of safety about appropriate use of data. And when we use data, the appropriate use of the data products, whatever that data product happens to be. And if that data product is generated by AI, we haven't quite worked out those safety guidelines yet.
So that's a really good one, and I was waiting for you to get to standards. Mr. Standards over there, if you've don't know Ian in that context, please have a chat to him anytime about any of the standards committees that he's been involved with around the world. If you've never been involved in a WC3 standards committee or any Web2, it's delightful. It's a really interesting experience for some of us. Battle scarred. But I'm really interested in this notion of how you've kind of brought that about, because it comes to this kind of conversation that we were having last week about the can we versus should we, right? Just because we can do something, should we do something? And you sort of talked about the relationship, your wife is a barrister and you talked about law. So one of the really interesting use cases that I kind of bring up all the time of where AI can be an absolute failure was the very early uses that they tried to roll out in America around sentencing. So if people aren't familiar with that, they fed it pretty much every decision that had ever been made in certain jurisdictions around, certain crimes, appearing before a judge, and they said, what would be the recommended sentence for this person? And let's get AI to determine that. Well, the problem with that is that the human element of that data is absolutely incredibly biased, and it's biased towards certain racial sort of things. It's biased on postcodes. It's biased on a whole bunch of things that people have experienced. And so when you feed sort of a model, a biased data set, of course it comes out. So for exactly the same crime at exactly the same level, one person was getting recommended 10 years in jail, somebody else was getting good behaviour and being released on parole. And so this discrepancy is there. There's another sort of use case around that with credit cards and women, where a bank first decided, not in Australia, so everybody can breathe at the moment, although it wouldn't surprise me, they said we're going to actually use an AI model to generate who can actually get what the credit score will be and who will be eligible for these credit cards and loans at what degrees. And husband and wife earning significantly more than the husband being rejected for loans and credit cards to the husband. Now, the husband happened to work in technology and, be a very public-facing person and came out and made a hullabaloo in the news about it. And so it was picked up. But if you didn't know that, so when we think about it, the can we versus should we, really interesting one when we're thinking about insurance and what's going on around the modelling around assurance and behind the scenes about how we actually understand our premiums. All of these sorts of places where it can be a tool for good, but it can also be unintended consequences. So where should we be pursuing opportunities? How do we safeguard? This is a really nice, easy question for the three of you. What do we need to be considering? What's the conversation that we need to get into with this? Because this is meaty. The can we versus should we? There's so much potential for productivity. I freaking love AI for sorting out things for me and rewriting and making me briefer. It summarized 4 pages of notes from our conversation last week to a page, which was great to keep me honest and on track a little bit. But you know, what do we do? And
Right.
I'm going to throw that open to first in, best
ahead.
dress with the
Go.
microphone.
I'll have a go because the microphone's here. So I mentioned I was in government. Also, I led the development of the New South Wales AI assurance framework, and it was about assuring everyone in government, everybody mandatory to apply, everyone in government's use of data and AI, not what they were doing, but how they were doing it with the data and the algorithms. And the approach we took was that as a review committee, we'd sit there and someone would bring a project forward, such as the seatbelt detection. And if we felt a bit uneasy about it, we would say, is it what you're doing? Or is it the fact you're using AI, or is it the fact you're using a data-driven process? So let's look at this thing that we have some unease about. And let's think about the data products that get created from the AI. And think about appropriate use, harm associated with use, harm associated with repeated use, harm associated with bystanders of the use of that. And let's now take the algorithm out. So it's no longer an AI-driven process. And let's look at all the things that algorithms do to data. And let's now take the data out. If we're still uncomfortable, take the data out. Think about every data set is biased, every data set is incomplete, every data set doesn't give you full coverage of the problem, but it can still be useful. And if we took the algorithm out and the data out, and everyone was still uncomfortable, then what we're actually saying is what you're doing is a problem. Now, our guidance was simply around, this is what to do to think about the data. This is what to do when you think about the algorithm. This is how to think about appropriate use of the data products. We're not going to tell you you can't do it, police or health or education, but you might want to think about whether or not this is just something that's an old process that you've scaled up through AI. AI amplifies, it accelerates, it adapts now to do more things. And if that's the problem, maybe what you're doing is just an old process in a new way, and you're amplifying all the wrinkles in the old process. Maybe you could think about it doing differently. So the side benefit of going through this process of decomposition was actually getting people, not us, getting the people putting the project forward to think about, are they really doing something just the way they've always done it, now faster and in an amplified, accelerated way? It also allowed people to think about bias in a much more considered way. Every one of us is biased. Every decision, by definition, means we have produced a result because we've decided on something which is a result of bias. And being more conscious about where those biases occur, and how we're treating them is actually a really nice side effect of all scrutiny around data-driven tools and AI. So again, that was an example from yesterday from working with New South Wales government, but it was a really nice way of having a really healthy conversation about why are we doing this, and are we just doing an old thing in a new way?
That was really interesting, and I'll add another aspect to that, which is who is responsible for the consequences? So who has accountability? And I think that's another question that maybe should be asked when we do things with AI. So everything you said was really, really interesting as well. Should we do it? That's one question to start with. But then when we think about getting an AI module to maybe make a decision, we should also ask, and who is responsible? What are the consequences of that decision, and who is responsible? So you may know, for example, that in the very early day of ChatGPT, people started writing their, in publications, started writing their articles with it. And very quickly, some of the publishers said, no, ChatGPT cannot be an author because you have to take responsibility for what's written. So you have to explicitly say, yes, I take responsibility for whatever is in this document. Doesn't matter who generated it, if it's me or somebody else. Same thing for, if something gets accepted, not accepted. I was talking with somebody earlier this morning, what the AI helps decide what cause doing that particular decision. It should also be taking accountability. And when the consequences are potentially really important, I think that's something else we need to understand. What are the consequences of that? And I know, for example, in Europe now, there is a regulation where if it's a life and death type decision, and I think it's mostly in the defense, but I haven't actually read the whole document, the AI cannot take that decision. It has to be a human. The human has to be accountable. So those are some of the other questions we should ask is what are the potential consequences? And do we really want to let the control of decisions to the AI, or should we make sure the human is still in control and we bring technology and a society where we understand what's happening and we have a control. So to me, that's another aspect of should we versus can we.
I'm going to be fascinated to hear from you, Juliet, because you
Oh.
have you have perspective from not only your own workplace, but the companies that you're working with. Do they have a handle on how to grow
Well,
this
it's
through
I tell you what's been really surprising is how quickly they have allowed or not allowed. It has to be allowed because it's available. Everybody's got access to various forms of AI, so they almost haven't had a choice about allowing or not allowing their people to use it to do aspects of their work, but how quickly they've embraced it and made it something that they could try and put some guidelines around. So, you know, large employers, us included, we've got a set of guidelines for our people. We're an audit company. We've got a lot of sensitive data. Clearly that data cannot be put on ChatGPT. So that was a very early, very fast direction that came from global, and it was absolutely going to be a fireable offence. I mean, there was no question that our data cannot go out onto, you know, the public network. So there's some things that you had to sort of get in place really quickly. But then when we built our own internal one, you can use it in different ways, but there are guidelines developed for that. And similarly, when I was talking to the people in the bank the other day, they were saying the same thing. You know, they're putting guardrails to try and help people understand when and how to use it. And to your point, who's accountable for the final output? You are accountable as the owner of that job, or the, you know, the person who's got that task for whatever you deliver, however you created it. But there were, I was reflecting on sort of when social media, you know, kind of really became just so prevalent. And there were some large companies who told their employees, you are not to use social media for anything work related. And that just massively backfired. Because I mean, how can you control sort of tens of thousands of people and what they're doing every day on their, you know, device? So again, giving them guardrails, treating them as adults, giving them some guidance around use this sensibly, ethically, carefully, honestly, you know, don't use our brand in these ways, you know, blah, blah, blah. You can control what you can control. It's sort of the same with AI. You have to just give people some guidance around what is right and not right and how to use it. But clearly they have to be responsible for the output.
Yeah, I think I think all of you have brought up some really interesting ways of thinking about it. It's essentially a risk framework, right? And a risk management thing. So how do you harness the good? And how do you take accountability and responsibility for the bad and risk mitigate in each way? So it's a really nice, it's nice to unpack that though and get away from the clickbait headlines of you know, the horror that could be coming. I'm going to ask one more question to you all. It's not my final question either. I'm going to reserve that one. So that one, keep that one in the pocket, you know, the one that's coming at the end of the session. I'm going to ask questions, open up to questions from the room and online in a moment. So if you are online and would like to ask a question, just pop it into the chat and I'll keep an eye there and try and weave it in if I can. And if you're in the room, because we've got people online, I will ask you to be slightly brief with the question if you can, because I'll have to repeat it so that the people online can hear, because I don't think we're going to have the ability to run around with microphones. I feel like the room's a little bit too much of a trip hazard to do that, and we don't have an abundance of microphones. But the thing that I just wanted to touch on, so that's your warning to get prepared, everybody, in case you didn't pick up on that. So the question that I just wanted to sort of throw to the panel is, you know, one about ethical frameworks. We've touched on that a little bit, but maybe the role of government in this and standards, frameworks, and, you know, responsible AI. Are we there? Do we need more? Are we lagging? Are we leading? What's the opportunity? You knew where that one was coming to.
Sure. Thanks, Sally. That would have once been a career limiting question, so thank you for waiting until I left. So one of the things about developing the AI assurance framework is we tried to test it against a whole series of other technologies to see whether it was really something specific about AI. I said it a couple of times, AI is a little bit different. It amplifies, it accelerates, it adapts. Now it generates, it translates, it interpolates since ChatGPT and so on came along. But we would test it against, for example, a calculator. Could you develop an assurance framework for a calculator? And does it do some of the same things? Or any sort of digital tool? We also did a test against, for example, a stapler. Can you build an assurance framework for a stapler? Of course you can. Don't run around with a stapler. Don't staple other people's work. Don't staple money.
Don't use it as a firing gun.
For example, all sorts of good things like that. And so the question was, what is it about AI that we really need to narrow in on? And I personally think that in the world of standardization. There's some really good standards happening in the world of AI now. So in the world of ISO, make standards for everything from building a smart city to a cup of tea. It really is a standard for a cup of tea, by the way. It's milk first. Sorry. It's easier to get the milk right than it is to put it in first when you put it in last. And the IEC, who do standards for electrotechnical equipment. And it's the first president of the IEC was Lord Kelvin, for anyone out there who's a history buff. They have a joint technical committee called JTC1, not very imaginative as a name. And the subcommittee 42, I'm getting to it, subcommittee 42 has released new standards on AI management. And that's kind of like agreeing that this is how a car works, this is how an accelerator works, this is how the seatbelts and such things work. On top of that, New South Wales has the assurance framework that says, well, actually everyone should drive on the left-hand side of the road and everyone should drive at certain speeds past schools. And that's sort of local soft regulation. The opportunity exists now at a national level to talk about regulation in terms of the special new things that AI can do that we didn't expect. So it can adapt, it can accelerate, it can amplify, but there are things like who's accountable and where do you put the decision point. So in New South Wales, the New South Wales Ombudsman called out that the automatic garnishing of bank accounts by Revenue New South Wales was illegal because they used automated decision making. And the decision making was pretty straightforward. If A and B, then C. And it's the same decision that a human being would have made. But the Ombudsman said a human being must make that decision every single time. So you cannot give that decision to an algorithm to make. So when thinking about regulation, it's really important to be clear about who's responsible and to call out those decision-making points, and then to address any particular capability that AI has, which is unique and special to AI, and it's not just any sort of automated decision-making. I personally think Europe has gone too far with its EU regulation. I think it's actually detrimental to Europe. But elements of that in terms of identifying types of risk and building protections around types of risk, I think would be a better approach to take.
Does anybody else want to add anything before I cut it off? Questions? Oh gosh, okay. I feel like I need a ticket system. Okay, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. So.
Okay, I was intrigued by Ian's comments because he's an electrical engineer and I started my career as an electrical engineer. But at one point, I was a bureaucrat in the New South Wales Treasury funding program. And one thing that struck me about the way bureaucrats look at programs and the outcomes of programs is that they tended to focus more on process rather than outcomes. And there are a number of reasons for that. Firstly, it's easier. Secondly, there were constraints in the process itself in terms of getting outcomes. But that's a constraint that to some extent is relieved, if you like, by AI. You're no longer constrained so much by the process in terms of getting outcomes. But there's another, perhaps more insidious reason why bureaucrats don't look at outcomes, and that is that the political overlay, because bureaucrats learn not to be in the firing line for politicians. And if you build into a program some review process that tells you whether a program is a success or not, no politician likes to be associated with a failure. So politicians don't like to have inbuilt review programs because they might not get results that they like. So is AI somehow going to get ahead of this political process? And how do you think that'll unfold?
So thankfully we got the microphone for when we got to that point. But I think the hypothesis is, and I'm just going to try and snapshot this really, is in the role of government and decisions are made and we're going to have an outcome that comes and they don't like it, so they bury it, is the translation that I'm going to say that you didn't say. You said it far more politely than that, but they keep it away. Is AI going to help us and give us greater visibility perhaps into programs and projects and things?
Yeah. So again, that would have been a career limiting question just a little while ago. So I was once part of a really big argument. I had a lot of arguments in government, and my working assumption was every day I was at work was my last day at work, so make it count. So I got involved in some really big arguments. One of them that I remember was around where to put the defibrillators, New South Wales, the automatic external defibrillators that you can have at a hospital hospital cardiac arrest, the survival rates are appallingly low. If you're defibrillated, if you haven't had a hospital cardiac arrest, you're defibrillated within 5 minutes, you've got a 10% chance of survival. If you're defibrillated within 10 minutes, you've got a 5% chance of survival. And the curve looks really quite dramatic. And I was brought into a conversation where people were discussing things in very large font, and there was health, there was fire and rescue, there were sporting associations, and there were other folks, and they were literally banging the table about whose responsibility, who decides, and who decides about defibrillators. And I thought, this isn't going to end well, but I've got to make sure this is a data-driven conversation. So we used all sorts of algorithms and all sorts, we used all sorts of data to identify defibrillators, where they were, whether they were in condition, and whether or not they were actually available during opening hours. And we built data assets that could be used to help understand where they all are, when they're available, and where they might be best placed. We also looked at having fire and rescue as co-first responders for the 000. And if you have an out of hospital cardiac arrest and someone calls 000, an ambulance is dispatched. But fire and rescue have defibrillators, they're trained how to use them, and they don't have as much to do as ambulances. So this was a really big political fight, and it ended very badly. It ended very, very badly. And it ended with everyone having a better understanding of what the problem actually was and the capability issue. But ultimately, it was a political question as to whether or not who's in charge. Is it fire and rescue, or is it health? And the answer is always health. Fast forward several years, Victor Dominello was leaving politics, and he said, we're going to release that updated data set. I said, are you sure? He said, yes. I said, are you really sure? He said, I've got a lot of political capital. I'm going to spend some. And so we released the data set, and we updated it, we curated it, we made sure it was in good shape. But it would never have happened without the bravery of someone saying, I don't care about the political consequences, I'm going to do the right thing. And so we released the Register of Defibrillators in New South Wales. So that's a very oblique way of answering your question, that politics gets in the way. It's not necessarily big P politics, it's politics at a bureaucracy level. And the need to evaluate how effective a decision was several years ago in current light of day, it's something that just isn't built into anybody's incentives, anybody's progress, because it can be very, very detrimental. And it takes real courage to do the right thing, and put air quotes around the right thing.
Before we go to the room, and I don't know whether the microphone has gone, if we can get prepared, Gabrielle. But I'm just going to call out, I kind of going to mix something here on the online one to throw to the panel, and I think this comes back to decision making, which would be really interesting, because there's the life and death decision making of AI, and then there's the kind of use cases of maybe where there's less risk involved. And the question is about the concept of automatic decision making, and can a machine really make a decision, or is it just going through the motions and is using probability? So I guess that's coming to what really is going on in an AI model. But also letting a machine determine a course of actions means we're no longer making a decision at all, which may be okay but needs to be acknowledged. So maybe if we could just kind of, I think you've touched on it already about, as a panel, around responsibility and ownership, but maybe when is it okay to kind of go with what the AI model's spilling out? Like how do we kind of get that risk framework right versus we must have a human see it, which I think we've already had that example about, sepsis alerts on hospitals, 100%, that is an alert, not a decision at that point. But maybe we'll go down the panel from Juliet. I think we'll have quite all.
Okay. So yeah. So when it comes to the work that we do, obviously most of it is not life and death. I mean, any of it, probably none of it. But you still have to make an informed decision, and that judgment that is required to work out what the AI has produced, what you've also done with the content that has been produced to create, the sort of outcome. Ultimately, somebody has to decide, is this a good solution for this organisation, for this client, for the problem that we're trying to solve? Is it better than it would have been if we hadn't used the AI? And that kind of goes back to the earlier comment I was making about learning your craft, because you learn to make those judgments and those sorts of decisions later in your career. You have to have had some experience in the ones that were the right decisions and the ones that were not, and learn those lessons along the way. And as you get better and more experienced, you start to sort of be able to understand where is the right way to take this. So definitely, I mean, our sort of approach to using any kind of technology, AI and any other technology, because, you know, the internet is obviously still there churning out a huge amount of information for all of us to access, is judgment of whether or not this is good quality, the right outcome, and actually answering the problem that we have to overlay to everything that comes out of the AI.
So yeah, I think again, we have lots of different tools around. It's not one size fits all. There's lots of different things. And we have to understand the capability of a different tool. And I use a word like Ian used, prediction as opposed to decision. The AI predicts something, right, an outcome, and then we can decide what to do. Now, depending on the tool and the example you gave, but I also know, for example, to detect melanoma or things like that, we know those tools are very well trained and they have, I'm going to make up a number, I don't know, but let's say they're 99% accurate. So we know it's fairly high level. And if we are then able to identify which types, under which circumstance there may be an error, then this is where you want to make sure the human gets involved. And if it's a really important decision of life and death, but other things, the human has to be able to question the results of the tool, we call it tool as opposed to AI, to make sure that, yeah, that makes sense, I understand that. In some cases, if we're pretty sure, if we're 100% sure it's always going to be correct, no need to do that. So we have to understand those edge cases. And I think that's where, you know, it's important to decide when then should the human be involved, because we understand that. And in some cases, no, you know, the AI can do, the tool does the right prediction. So we don't really need to do that, but it's not going to be the same in every case. So we have to be careful with that and understand the capability. So when I talked about trust before, we tend to use the word calibrated trust. So you neither 100% trust everything or never trust it. You have to understand its capability. Under which circumstance you know the system is likely to get it right, and then you question a bit, and under which we don't know. You know, so like we are doing some work right now with a gentleman who's in the room here in cybersecurity alerts coming in security centers. Some systems are very good at identifying some of the alerts coming up, and there's no need for the human to be involved. But in some of very complex cases or new type of potential security problems, you need the human to be there and then solve the problem. But in some cases you don't, you know, and there's no need to do that. So that's part of this calibrated trust and understanding the capability of each tool under different circumstances.
Yeah, I think I might just add something there. In the case of health, it's really interesting, right? Because we actually do have software as a medical device as a regulation now. And when you look at health, what's fascinating about AI is we actually have a pathway to what's the gold standard of healthcare. So if you're going to have an AI model to help in any decision making or in any sort of standard of care, anything in the health sector, it has to go up against a clinical trial of what's best right now. So we have these methodologies to kind of build trust in some sectors and kind of really kind of unpack that, which I think is super fascinating. I am conscious of time and I do want to get to at least one more question in the room. So Gabrielle, you've got the microphone.
Sally Ann, thank you. And always a great job you do as MC, always very engaging. Thank you so much.
Great talent to work with.
Combination. Juliet, a question for you about the maturity of the AI models that you see in industry. So in my experience, I see organisations have Copilot, so that comes part of the Microsoft package. Then they might have an AI industry-focused product. So an example would be a big law firm might have LexisNexis that has something that is a compilation of a lot of legal resource. What I've seen less of, but I'd be interested in your experience, is a custom-built AI model for an organisation for their own purposes. Just if you would mind commenting on that.
Yeah, no, happy to. There are some, absolutely, that have been created, but they are very expensive. So as I mentioned, EY has built one for us. It's based on Copilot, it's based on the Microsoft platform, but it's entirely a walled garden that only we can access. And there are some organisations, probably large like ours, who've done the same. many that have not and probably can't, and so they'll be using a combination of, you know, sort of what's available with the protocols that they will create within their own organisation. I know big tech companies are doing a lot working with employers to sort of see how much they can help them create some safety within the organisation without maybe going as far as building their own LLM within their own organisation, but there's not that many yet that have created their own. The vast majority are still using the off-the-shelf AI, but they're trying to create those in a way with the tech partner who's giving them as much security and privacy as they can without it being entirely for only their use. Yeah.
So I'm going to take one more question from the room, and then I am going to try and wrap this up. So that microphone, so if somebody could get it up there. So thank you, relay, beautiful.
Thanks very much. Mike Giro from the Warren Centre. Ian Opperman gave us a talk at the Warren Centre some years ago and told us that about the fraud in green slip insurance and what a terrible fraud it was. It seemed to me that was before AI was popular. Wouldn't AI have made your job so much easier in detecting where that fraud existed? And the other part of that question is, how do you know? I mean, my audiologist tells me that certain companies now claiming all their hearing aids have got AI. She says it's a garbage, they haven't. How do you know when AI is actually being used? That's a sort of double question.
Thank you very much, and thank you for remembering that I came. It's the trouble with being around for a while.
Do you remember what you said?
Indeed. So there was some self-interest in that deposit third-party insurance. As a consequence of that reform, all of us had our premiums reduced, and so I was highly motivated to find ways to deal with fraud. So AI is a really, really bad term. It describes that thing that's over there that we're not quite there yet, and once we get there, we say, well, actually, this isn't AI, that's AI over there. So AI is a use of data, and it can be algorithmic, it can adapt, it could do things like generative models and so on, and for large language models. What we did with deposit third-party insurance was a whole lot of different triangulated ways of looking through data, and we also brought in lots of novel data sets. And part of what we used to do was, as part of the upskilling of government, was to demonstrate just how powerful second order and even third order data sets are. Not exactly the one that describes your problem, but one that describes something where your problem is next to it, and build a lot of those data sets around it so you can actually start to infer things in the middle. Something actually learned whilst at CSIRO. And so we used a lot of relatively unsophisticated by modern terms algorithms, but still algorithms that would search and find and hunt, detect, and look for anomalies, then triangulate and then identify networks. Today, a lot of that work would just be a whole lot easier. I think Sally talked about taking days worth of effort and going down to minutes. So that's the sort of thing we would have been able to do. We would have been able to try a lot more hypotheses as well. So rather than try half a dozen different ways of looking at things, we could have tried 1,000 ways of looking at things. So it accelerates. AI is an accelerant. In terms of what hearing aids, such things have in them, if anything has an adaptive algorithm, then people will stretch and say that's AI, because it was a while ago. So it's sort of rear-looking AI. And my father's got brand new hearing aids which have an adaptive component to it, and he adapts by yelling louder when he puts his I know my father's not online, I know he's not listening. So he will adapt that adaptive algorithm, and it's interesting. So it's a bit of a marketing term. Someone said earlier that if you've got a startup and you're not doing AI, then you don't really have any chance of generating business. So
If you want to raise money right now, it's an AI business. I'm an AI startup
we
doing
are an AI
XYZ.
startup service. So thank you for remembering. Thank you very much for bringing that up. It would be so much faster now and so much less grunt work in order to get to the valuable insights.
So I'm really conscious that there's a lot of questions still online, and I know there's a lot of questions in the room, but we are fronting up to a 2 o'clock finish, and I do want to be respectful and get time people to have a tea and coffee, particularly our panelists. So I'm going to take liberty of asking one final session with a version of this question, because I think it's great to come along and get insights. It's great to learn. I think you've given us some really valuable things to walk away from today, particularly around how to think about this and who's the decision maker and accountability and risk, but also opportunity. And I'm sure people will go away and think about these things and apply them to their own circumstances in the worlds and the communities that they're working in. But I really love the front of mind thing. So if there's one action or one thing that you want people to take, everyone in this room and online to take away from today, what would it be? And we're going to come down the line from Ian, because that's where the microphone is.
Right, so one thing will have a few ands in it. You should experiment with AI, and you should look at the New South Wales AI assurance framework, and you should educate yourself around appropriate uses of data.
I love it. 3 in 1, 4 in 1, 3 in 1, 3.
So I come very much from a human's perspective. So I will say let's design and create a future where the human is still in control, not merely in the loop as is often used.
And I would say, not dissimilar to Ian, understand the AI that your industry is using and use it.
I really love that. I think you've all been incredibly generous with your time and your wisdom and sharing your experiences. And I did ask you to share your experiences, because I think those lived realities and those learnings, the lessons from the past, but the lessons that you're actually learning right now on the job with clients, with researchers, with customers, I think are incredibly valuable, because recognizing that actually anybody who comes and tells you they're an AI expert right now is just on the journey with the rest of us as well. So thank you so much for your time and your contributions and your wisdom and your generosity in sharing with us. Thank you all for joining us online. Thank you for those of you in the room joining us here. That by no means I'm not going to tell you what to do from now, because I don't feel like I'm in charge the minute I step away from here. So my duties are done, but I've really enjoyed it, and I would really encourage you all to continue the conversation, not just today, but to maybe in particular share some of the wisdom that you've heard here. I think it's been a fabulous conversation, and I've enjoyed our time with you very, very much. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sally.
And had I had the chance to ask a question, panel, I would have asked, is it feasible that artificial intelligence will ever become conscious, and will we ever know whether it does and when it does? But maybe you can think about that over coffee. And Ian, for your benefit, my colleague Peter Thornton has explained to me, when you said that you didn't know where to place defibrillators, he points out that you place them on the chest. Okay, so that would have saved a lot of trouble. Thank you, Peter. Well, look, I won't by any means attempt to summarise, Sally, what you and your panel have done, but it was certainly an outstanding group of people that we had out here. A lot of marvellous information, and I hadn't realised I had a good idea what Sally does in her cicada innovations with her with the work that she does there, but I had not realised until you read it out and summarised it all in 1 minute, a vast array of industries in which you work with your startups. But so thank you very much, and thank you for so competently organising our panel. And we went very well, and I'm not going to try and summarise anything, but I think that it was very well balanced, and the comments that were made, for instance, was a general. There's Cecile has spilled the wine yet again. I think there was a very good sense of optimism, but I like the final advice was that we must understand AI. That it's we cannot just sit back and assume that AI is so clever that we will just press buttons on a machine and everything will fall into place, because there are so many pitfalls Juliet pointed a couple out, apart from being most optimistic and explaining how widely EY are making use, very good use, that there is poorer communication skills as the result of the younger people using AI, and there is a need to create skills, and it's harder to do that now. And we find that also in engineering. And I'm just currently judging the World Federation of Consulting Engineers International Awards, infrastructure awards, and it's quite surprising the number of outstanding projects that make use of AI in things like very fast train projects, high-tech projects, civil engineering projects, which are making major use of AI. So it's certainly there, and we had the opportunity today to hear from the experts. And if I might read from the notice of the meeting, with so much happening so quickly, it can be hard to make sense of exactly what AI is capable of now and what it might be able to do in the future. Our expert panel will tackle some of the biggest issues, and they did just that. So if you wouldn't mind joining with me to thank Sally and Ian and Julia. Okay, that's the end. There will be another luncheon here with Professor Attila Brungs, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University of New South Wales, in the 18th of September. And then on the 24th, I believe it is, of October, we have Dr. Sue Pearce, who is the head of the Department of Health in New South Wales, talking about the future of health in New South Wales, which will be another outstanding event, I believe. So keep those in mind. Everyone here today will get a notice about those events. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the day.